Welcome, my name is Luis Paz, and today I want to tell you about EPAS1, mutations and paragangliomas in cyanotic and congenital heart disease. Let's start with the definition. Pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas are called catecholamine secreting tumors of chromatin cells with frequent germline, somatic or post-zygotic mutations in genes that are involved in hypoxia-related pathways, including BHL, SDHA, SDHB, SDHC, SDHD, SDAF2, EGLN1, FH, MDH2, and EPAS1. Applications in medicine. These mutations result in aberrant and constitutive activations of hypoxia-inducible factors (HIFS), even under normal levels of oxygen, a condition known as pseudohypoxia beyond genetic causes. Prolonged exposure to hypoxia has been reported as an environmental risk factor for pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas that arise in persons living at high altitude.
This is a brief video on cyanotic congenital heart defects. We're going to be talking about 5 cyanotic congenital heart defects, and these heart defects are called cyanotic because they result in the mixture of deoxygenated blood with oxygenated blood and then pouring of that mixed blood into the systemic circulation. So these congenital heart defects can cause cyanosis in newborns, in infants, and even in older patients. And that's why they're called cyanotic congenital heart defects. We're going to be talking about 5 defects listed across the left there, and they each have a number assigned to them. That number is going to serve as sort of a mnemonic to help you remember these 5 defects. So let's jump into number 1 of the cyanotic congenital heart defects, and that is truncus arteriosus. This one's labeled with a 1 because we have one big vessel in the middle of the heart. This big vessel is called the truncus arteriosus, which comes from the heart during the developmental stage. Usually this truncus arteriosus is split with a wall that splits the aortic and the pulmonary arteries. And now this did not happen in people who have this disease, so we call it a persistent truncus arteriosus. And we can see that blood kind of mixes between the two ventricles before going out into the pulmonary circulation and into the systemic circulation. So most patients also have a ventricular septal defect with persistent truncus arteriosus, and we can kind of see that in the picture there too. The ventricles don't really have much of a septum between them, allowing for even more mixture of blood as it's pumped into the aorta and the pulmonary artery. This is persistent truncus arteriosus. We see mixed blood going into both sides of the circulation, both the systemic and the pulmonary circulation. Next one, we have 2, which is transposition of the great arteries. This one's called 2 because we have 2 great arteries and they're both switched. Now, the great arteries are the aorta and the pulmonary artery. These are usually attached to the aorta is usually attached to the left ventricle. The pulmonary artery is usually attached to the right ventricle. In this case, they're switched. And this is a very interesting disease because it results in 2 separate circulations of blood. The right side of the heart is pumping through the systemic circulation, and that's like an isolated system from the left side of the heart, which is pumping through the pulmonary circulation. So in order for somebody with transposition of the great arteries to survive, they need at least one shunt. This could be an atrial septal defect, a ventricular septal defect, or a PDA, a patent ductus arteriosus, which is a connection between the aorta and the pulmonary artery. So they need some kind of connection between left and right heart to allow for mixing of the blood, to allow for them to survive. In that image that we have on the right there, we see an atrial septal defect. That's allowing for the mixing of the blood, turning it purple to pump through the systemic circulation, allowing for the patient to survive. Next, we have 3. 3 helps us remember tricuspid atresia. There's not much to do with the 3 here, except for the fact that it has to do with the tricuspid valve, except we don't have a tricuspid valve. Instead of a valve here, we have a wall. Tricuspid atresia is the tricuspid valve being replaced with a solid wall that you cannot get past. So this means that in order for the blood to complete a circuit, you have to have both an atrial septal defect and a ventricular septal defect. Blood needs to be able to flow into the right atrium from the superior vena cava, through to the left atrium through an atrial septal defect, down into the left ventricle, and then back to the right ventricle through a ventricular septal defect. We need both septal defects in order for somebody with a wall replacing the tricuspid valve to survive. This is tricuspid atresia. 4 helps us remember tetralogy of Fallot. Tetralogy means 4 things. We have 4 odd things going on here. These 4, we have them labeled A, B, C, D, and also labeled in that right diagram. And these 4 are A. First one is pulmonic stenosis. The pulmonic valve is thin. It's hard for blood to get through. We're going to skip over to D because I see it kind of as a direct result of A. D is right ventricular hypertrophy. If we're not easily pumping blood through the pulmonic valve, if we have pulmonic stenosis, A, and we cannot pump blood through it, the right ventricle is going to get much larger as it struggles to pump blood. This is a compensatory mechanism, right ventricular hypertrophy, as a result of pulmonic stenosis. So that explains A and D. Next we have B. B is a overriding aorta, meaning that the aorta, which usually kind of points to the left ventricle, is pointing into both chambers here. The aorta is taking blood from both the left and the right ventricle. Normally it just takes blood from the left ventricle. And kind of going along the same lines as the overriding aorta is C, which is a ventricular septal defect, which essentially kind of connects the 2 ventricles. We don't have much of a septum between the left and the right ventricle, which allows the blood to mix in between the ventricles and go mostly into that overriding aorta. So these 4 qualities contribute to the tetralogy of Fallot. And lastly, 5 letters in total anomalous pulmonary venous connection. Total anomalous pulmonary venous connection. 5 words, 5 letters in the abbreviation. This is an interesting disorder because both veins, both large veins, the pulmonary vein and the superior and inferior vena cavas, both dump into the right atria. So we have mixing of blood right there, right before it gets into the heart in the right atria. Now, in order for a patient to survive with this, it needs to be associated with an atrial septal defect to allow that mixed blood in the right atria to go into the left atria and then go through the systemic circulation that way. We sometimes also see a patent ductus arteriosus. Again, that's a connection between the aorta and the pulmonary artery, and that can help with the mixing of blood and the connection between the left and right circulations here as well. This is total anomalous pulmonary venous connection. That's it for this video. I hope it was helpful, and thank you for listening.
Okay, let's continue. Pros and cons. Given the relatively young age of patients presenting with cyanotic congenital heart disease and pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas, and inherited susceptibility to pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas will be expected to account for most cases. However, no other germline pathogenic mutations or other syndromic tumors that have been associated with pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas were found in these 5 patients.
Congenital heart conditions. A congenital heart condition is a problem with the structure of the heart, which develops before a baby is born. The most common congenital conditions include a hole between 2 of the heart's chambers, septal defects, narrowing of the body's main artery, coarctation of the aorta, narrowing of the pulmonary valve stenosis. These affect almost 1 in 100 births in the UK. In most cases, a problem has occurred during the early development of the fetus. This could be due to a mistake in a gene, but in most cases, there's no known cause. Most defects can be detected during pregnancy, but some are not found until a baby is born. Less serious conditions may not be spotted until much later. Symptoms in babies or toddlers can include a blue tinge to the skin, poor feeding, breathing problems, extreme tiredness, rapid heartbeat, excessive sweating, and chest pain. Treatment depends on the individual and the condition. Some only require regular medical checkups, but others may need medication or surgery. There is evidence that some congenital heart conditions can run in families. The BHF is funding research about this.
Okay. Issue applied in Ecuador. The high frequency of mutations of EPAS1 in the samples, 80%, contrasts with rates of only 5 to 6% in cohorts of unselected patients with pheochromocytinomas and paragangliomas, which argues for a causative role for the EPAS1 mutations in the development of pheochromocytinomas and paragangliomas that arise in patients with cyanotic heart disease. Conclusion: it's possible that the EPAS1 mutations endow chromaffin cells that have been exposed to chronic hypoxia with the ability to amplify the onogenic prototype of HIF2A. That's all. Thank you.